I sat at the family dinner table as my father's voice exploded across the room, calling me the most selfish daughter he'd ever known. My sister Sarah nodded in agreement while our mother stayed silent. The accusation hit like a knife because for 10 years I had been the family's financial backbone, sacrificing my dreams, relationships, and savings to keep them afloat. Tonight, I was finally done. I reached into my purse for a thick stack of receipts that would change everything forever. 3 hours earlier, I had driven through the familiar streets of suburban Columbus, Ohio, my hands gripping the steering wheel as I mentally prepared for another family dinner where I would be criticized while secretly funding everyone's comfortable lifestyle. The autumn leaves crunched under my tires as I pulled into the driveway of the house I had been paying the mortgage on for 8 years without anyone knowing. My name is Amber, and at 29 years old, I should have been building my own life instead of propping up a family that treated me like their personal ATM while calling me selfish. I grabbed the manila envelope from my passenger seat, filled with bank statements, receipts, and payment confirmations that told the real story of our family dynamics. Walking through the front door, I was greeted by the smell of my mother's pot roast and the sound of my sister's twins arguing over toys in the living room. Sarah looked up from her phone, barely acknowledging my presence, as she scrolled through social media posts about her latest shopping spree. My father, Michael, sat in his recliner, remote control in hand, complaining about the cable bill while wearing the new work boots I had secretly purchased for him last month. "Amber, honey, perfect timing," my mother Patricia called from the kitchen. "Could you grab the groceries from my car? I forgot I had them out there." I noticed the bags were from Whole Foods, not our usual budget-friendly supermarket. Another expense I would somehow end up covering when my mother's credit card got declined next week. I brought in organic produce premium steaks and imported cheese that cost more than most families spent on groceries in a month. Dinner started pleasantly enough with Sarah sharing stories about her job at the local bank and my parents discussing their plans for spring yard work. Then my father dropped his bombshell announcement that changed everything. "I've been looking at trucks down at Henderson's dealership," he said, cutting into his steak with enthusiasm. "There's a beautiful Ford F-150 with all the bells and whistles. Thought I might treat myself after all these years of driving that old beater." The truck he was referring to cost $45,000. I had seen him browsing it online and knew exactly which model had caught his attention. My stomach dropped as I realized he was serious about this purchase. "Dad, maybe we should wait until the finances are a bit more stable," I suggested gently, trying to avoid conflict while being realistic about our family's actual financial situation. The atmosphere changed instantly. My father's face darkened, and he slammed his fork down on his plate with enough force to make the water glasses tremble. Sarah stopped chewing and stared at me with disapproval written across her features. "Though there it is," Michael said, his voice rising with anger. "The most selfish attitude I have ever seen from someone who calls herself my daughter. You sit there in judgment of how I spend my money while you contribute nothing to this household except criticism and negativity." My mouth fell open in shock. Sarah immediately jumped in to support our father's attack, nodding vigorously as if she had been waiting for this moment. "Dad's absolutely right, Amber. You have never sacrificed anything for this family. You live here rent-free, eat our food, use our utilities, and then have the nerve to tell Dad he cannot enjoy the fruits of his labor. It's disgusting how selfish you are." The words hit me like physical blows. I looked around the table at the three people who should have loved and supported me, seeing nothing but accusation and resentment in their faces. My mother remained silent, refusing to meet my eyes as my father continued his verbal assault. "Your sister understands what family means," he said, gesturing towards Sarah with pride. "She moved back home to help us through difficult times, brought her children here so we could all support each other. But you just take and take without ever giving anything back." That was the moment something inside me finally snapped. I had reached my breaking point after years of financial manipulation disguised as family loyalty. I stood up from my chair, my legs shaking with a mixture of rage and determination. "You want to know about sacrifice and contribution?" I asked, my voice deadly calm despite the storm raging inside my chest. "Let me show you exactly what I have given this family." I reached into my purse and pulled out the manila envelope I had been carrying for weeks, waiting for the right moment to reveal its contents. Inside were copies of every bank statement, mortgage payment, utility bill, and receipt that documented my true role in keeping our family afloat financially. The first document I placed on the table was a mortgage statement, showing that I had been the sole payer on our family home since 2014. 8 years of monthly payments totaling over $200,000, all coming from my marketing coordinator salary, while everyone assumed my father was handling the house payments with his construction work income. As I spread the receipts across the dinner table like evidence in a courtroom, the silence became deafening. Each piece of paper represented a sacrifice I had made without recognition, a financial burden I had carried while being labeled selfish by the very people who benefited from my generosity. "Here's the mortgage," I said, my voice growing stronger with each revelation. "Every single payment since Dad lost his job at Morrison Construction and never found steady work again. $212,000 over 8 years. I placed the property tax receipts next to the mortgage statements, watching my father's face turn pale as he recognized his signature forged on documents he had never actually paid for. Property taxes, $18,000. I've been covering these since 2015 when the county threatened foreclosure for non-payment. Sarah's confident expression began to falter as I continued laying out the evidence of my contributions. I pulled out utility bills with my name on the payment confirmations, grocery receipts, totaling thousands of dollars, and insurance payments that kept our family covered when my parents' coverage lapsed. Electric bills, gas bills, water trash, internet cable, $47,000 total. The groceries everyone eats, including Sarah's organic baby food and gluten-free products that cost triple the regular brands, $28,000. But the most devastating revelations were yet to come. I reached deeper into my envelope and pulled out medical bills and school expenses that painted a picture of just how extensively I had been supporting not just my parents, but my sister's entire family without anyone knowing. Sarah's children's medical bills. I continued placing the receipts in front of my sister, who was now staring at the papers in disbelief. Emergency room visits, prescription medications, dental work, vision care. $15,000 over the past 3 years because your insurance doesn't cover dependents and you couldn't afford the premium upgrade. Sarah's face went white as she realized I had been secretly paying for her children's health care while she criticized me for being selfish. The twins' broken arm treatments, ear infection medications, and routine checkups had all been funded by the aunt they barely acknowledged. As school supplies, field trip fees, sports equipment, school photos, graduation ceremonies. $4,000 so your kids could participate in normal childhood activities without being singled out for poverty. I placed the car payment records on the table next, watching Sarah's shock transform into horror as she recognized the loan documents for her Honda CR-V. Sarah's car payments, the vehicle you drive to work every day, take your children to school in, and use for your weekend shopping trips. $24,000 over 5 years because your credit score couldn't qualify for financing after your divorce. My mother finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper, as she tried to process the magnitude of what I was revealing. "Amber, sweetie, we had no idea you were covering so many expenses. We thought your father's income was handling most of these bills." The irony was devastating. While I had been sacrificing my future to keep everyone comfortable, they had convinced themselves that I was a burden who contributed nothing to the family's well-being. I had given up graduate school to afford their lifestyle, broken off my engagement to David because I couldn't afford both a wedding and family expenses and lived paycheck to paycheck despite earning a decent salary. I gave up my master's degree program at Ohio State. I said, my voice breaking slightly as I remembered the dreams I had abandoned. The program that would have qualified me for marketing director positions with $60,000 salary increases. I chose to stay home and support this family instead of advancing my career. The engagement ring situation was the most painful sacrifice to discuss. I pulled out the receipt from the jewelry store where I had returned my engagement ring to David using the refund money to cover my father's medical emergency the previous winter. I broke up with David because I couldn't afford to plan a wedding while covering everyone else's expenses. The man who loved me enough to propose after 2 years together, who had already put a down payment on a house for our future family. I gave up the love of my life to be this family's financial safety net. Sarah started crying finally, understanding the depth of my sacrifices, but I wasn't finished. The most recent expenses were the ones that had pushed me to this breaking point, and my family needed to understand exactly what their criticism had cost me emotionally. Last month's emergency repairs on Mom's car, $800. Dad's new work boots because his old ones had holes, $200. Sarah's credit card payment so her children wouldn't lose their field trip privileges, $300. The family cell phone plan that keeps everyone connected, $150 monthly for the past 6 years. I had kept detailed records of every sacrifice because part of me had always known this day would come, the day when their ingratitude and criticism would force me to defend my contributions to people who should have appreciated them without explanation. My father sat in stunned silence, no longer looking like the angry patriarch who had called me selfish minutes earlier. He looked like a man confronting the reality of his financial dependence on the daughter he had just verbally attacked for being unsupportive. Just as the weight of my financial revelations was settling over my family, my phone buzzed with an incoming text message. The notification came from my cousin Jenny, who had been at our family barbecue the previous month and witnessed something that would shatter what remained of my trust in Sarah. "Amber, I've been wanting to tell you this for weeks. After what Sarah said about you at the barbecue, I can't stay quiet anymore. She told everyone you were lazy and freeloading at home while she was taking care of Mom and Dad financially. I have video if you need proof." I read the message out loud, watching Sarah's face transform from shocked remorse to guilty panic. The room erupted into chaos as the implications of Jenny's revelation became clear to everyone present. "But what barbecue?" my father demanded, looking between Sarah and me with growing confusion. "What did you tell people about your sister?" Sarah tried to backtrack, her voice shaking as she realized her web of lies was unraveling in real time. "Dad, it's not what it sounds like. Jenny's misunderstanding what she heard." But I was already scrolling through my phone to call Jenny back, putting the conversation on speaker so everyone could hear the truth about Sarah's deception. My cousin answered immediately, her voice filled with righteous anger as she confirmed my worst fears. "Jenny, I'm here with my family. Can you repeat what you just texted me about the barbecue?" "Oh, Amber, I'm so glad you're finally finding out." Sarah spent 20 minutes at the barbecue telling Uncle Robert, Aunt Linda, and the neighbors about how you were this lazy deadbeat living at home without paying rent or contributing anything. She painted herself as this responsible single mother who was taking care of your parents financially while you just mooched off everyone. The blood drained from my mother's face as she realized Sarah had been actively damaging my reputation within our extended family. My father's confusion transformed into anger as he understood that his angel daughter had been lying to relatives about our family dynamics. "She specifically told Mrs. Henderson from down the street that you were emotionally unstable and couldn't hold down a steady job." Jenny continued, her voice carrying the weight of uncomfortable truth. Sarah said she was working extra hours at the bank to cover household expenses because you were unreliable with money and spending everything on yourself. I looked directly at Sarah, who was now crying harder as her manipulation tactics were exposed in front of the very people she had been deceiving. The scope of her betrayal went far beyond financial dependence. She had systematically destroyed my reputation to elevate herself in the eyes of our community. "There's more," Jenny said, her voice hesitant but determined. "Sarah also told people that you had some kind of shopping addiction, and that's why you couldn't contribute to family expenses. She made it sound like your parents were suffering because of your selfish spending habits." The irony was staggering. While I had been sacrificing every luxury and living like a monk to afford everyone else's comfort, Sarah had been portraying me as a spendthrift who wasted money on personal indulgences. I couldn't remember the last time I had bought myself anything beyond basic necessities. My father's earlier anger at me was now redirected towards Sarah as he began to understand the scope of her deception. "Sarah Elizabeth Thompson, how could you lie about your sister like that? How could you let me believe Amber wasn't contributing when she's been paying for everything?" But Sarah's betrayal ran even deeper than reputation damage. As I continued reading through my text messages, I discovered that this dinner had been orchestrated as part of a larger manipulation scheme designed to extract more money from me through guilt and family pressure. "This whole dinner was planned," I said, showing my phone to my parents. "Look at these messages between Sarah and Mom from this afternoon." The text conversation revealed that Sarah had convinced our mother to invite me for a family dinner, specifically so they could pressure me into giving her additional money for a larger apartment. Sarah wanted to move out of our parents' house, but needed first month's rent, last month's rent security deposit, and moving expenses that totaled over $4,000. "You were going to ambush me for more money," I said, looking at both Sarah and my mother with a mixture of hurt and disgust. "After everything I've already given you, planned this whole evening to manipulate me into funding Sarah's move." Patricia tried to defend the plan, her voice weak and defensive, as she realized how manipulative their scheme appeared when exposed. "Amber, we just thought if you understood how much Sarah needed help establishing independence, you would want to support her transition to her own place." By calling me selfish and attacking my character, I asked, incredulous at their twisted logic. "By letting Dad humiliate me over a truck purchase while you both knew I was funding everything else." Sarah finally found her voice, but instead of apologizing, she tried to justify her actions with more manipulation. "Amber, you don't understand the pressure I'm under as a single mother. I needed everyone to see that I was trying my best to contribute while dealing with my own financial struggles. So you threw me under the bus to protect your reputation?" I asked, my voice rising with justified anger. "You let our entire extended family think I was a deadbeat while I was secretly paying for your children's medical care, your car, and your living expenses." The magnitude of Sarah's betrayal was becoming clearer with each revelation. She had not only taken advantage of my financial support, but had actively worked to destroy my relationships with extended family members to ensure I wouldn't have anywhere else to turn when I finally reached my breaking point. My phone continued buzzing with supportive messages from relatives who were learning the truth about our family's financial dynamics through Jenny's real-time updates. Apparently, my cousin was live texting the entire confrontation to family members who had been concerned about the stories Sarah had been spreading about me. "Aunt Linda wants me to tell you that she never believed Sarah's stories anyway." Jenny's voice came through the speaker. "She said it never made sense that someone with your work ethic and education would be irresponsible with money. She's been worried about you for months." In my emotional state, I accidentally knocked over my father's laptop bag while reaching for more receipts from my purse. The contents spilled across the floor, revealing items that would expose the darkest secret our family had been hiding: my father's gambling addiction that had been consuming money for years, while I unknowingly funded his losses. Casino membership cards scattered across the hardwood floor, like confessions of guilt. Gold-level VIP cards from Hollywood, casino premium player cards from Scioto Downs, and frequent visitor rewards from the local Latino painted a picture of systematic gambling that explained where his construction income had actually been going for the past decade. But the casino cards were just the beginning. Loan documents from predatory lenders revealed the true scope of my father's addiction and the financial devastation it had caused our family. Title loans against vehicles I thought were paid-off payday loans, with interest rates exceeding 300%, and personal loans from offshore companies that specialized in lending to gambling addicts created a paper trail of financial destruction. "Oh, Dad," I said, my voice barely above a whisper as I held up a casino statement showing losses of $8,000 in a single month. "What is this?" Michael's face went completely white as he realized his secret was finally exposed. The family emergencies I had been covering for years weren't medical bills or home repairs like I had been told. They were gambling debts that my father had accumulated while spending entire paychecks at local casinos and online betting sites. "Those aren't what they look like," he said weakly, but the evidence was overwhelming. Bank statements showed regular withdrawals at casino ATMs, credit card charges at gambling establishments, and mysterious wire transfers to offshore gambling websites. My mother's reaction revealed that she had known about the gambling addiction for at least 2 years, but had hoped it would stop on its own. Patricia broke down completely sobbing as she confessed her knowledge of Michael's addiction and her complicity in hiding it from me. "I thought if I didn't tell you, maybe he would get control of it," she said through her tears. "I was afraid that if you knew about the gambling, you would stop helping us financially and we would lose the house." The betrayal cut deeper than the financial losses because I had trusted my father with access to my banking information for what I thought was family budgeting purposes. He had been monitoring my savings account balance to calculate exactly how much money he could lose at the casino while still maintaining our family's lifestyle through my contributions. "How much?" I asked, dreading the answer, but needing to understand the full scope of the destruction. "How much money have you lost gambling while I've been paying for everything else?" Michael tried to minimize his addiction, calling it recreation and stress relief from the pressure of being unemployed. But the loan documents told the real story. I calculated over $60,000 in gambling losses over the past 4 years, a loan money that could have paid off the house, funded my graduate education, or allowed me to marry David and start my own family. The most devastating revelation came when I discovered that some of the emergency money I had given my family had been used directly to pay gambling debts, rather than the medical bills and home repairs I had been told about. My father had been using my emotional attachment to family welfare to fund his addiction, while destroying our financial future. "The roof repair last spring," I said, remembering the $3,000 I had transferred within hours of being told about urgent leak damage. There was no roof repair, was there? Michael's silence confirmed my suspicion. The money had gone to cover gambling losses that were threatening collection action from loan sharks who had started calling our house and visiting his former construction sites looking for payment. But the gambling addiction explained more than just missing money. It revealed why my father had been so hostile toward my financial input and advice. Addicts resent oversight of their spending because it interferes with their ability to feed their addiction. My suggestions to wait on large purchases and budget more carefully had been threatening his access to gambling money. "This is why you got so angry about me questioning the truck purchase," I realized aloud. "You weren't planning to buy a truck. You needed me to feel guilty enough to give you more money for gambling." The truck discussion had been another manipulation designed to extract funds through guilt and family pressure. By making me feel selfish for questioning his spending, my father was positioning himself to demand money that would ultimately be lost at the casino rather than used for any family benefit. Sarah's shock appeared genuine as she realized our father had been lying to her as well. She had believed his stories about my selfishness while he was systematically destroying the family's financial foundation through gambling losses that none of us had suspected. "Dad, how could you let Amber sacrifice everything while you were throwing money away?" Sarah asked, her voice filled with horror as she understood the scope of his deception. But Michael's addiction had created more than financial damage. It had warped his perception of family relationships and turned him into a master manipulator who used guilt, anger, and emotional abuse to extract money from his daughter, while she believed she was helping her family through temporary difficulties. The construction company he claimed to be rebuilding was actually defunct, destroyed by his gambling-related absences and unreliability, with clients who had lost trust in his ability to complete projects on schedule and within budget. He had been living on unemployment benefits and my financial support while pretending to be actively working toward family stability. As I gathered the evidence of his gambling addiction from the floor, I realized that everything I thought I knew about our family's financial situation had been built on lies designed to exploit my love and loyalty, while funding a destructive addiction that would never be satisfied no matter how much I sacrificed. As I continued processing my father's gambling addiction, I noticed my mother, Patricia, fumbling nervously with her purse, trying to prevent me from seeing its contents. Her suspicious behavior during this moment of family crisis caught my attention, and I realized she might be hiding something equally devastating. "Mom, what's in your purse that you don't want me to see?" I asked, my voice firm with newfound determination to uncover every deception that had been poisoning our family relationships. Patricia clutched her handbag defensively, but Sarah surprised everyone by reaching over and opening it before our mother could protest. Inside, scattered among typical purse items, were glossy real estate brochures for retirement communities in Florida, complete with pricing information and application paperwork partially filled out. "Sunset Gardens, Retirement Village." I read aloud from the cover of the most prominent brochure. "Your golden years await in beautiful Sarasota, starting at $2,000 monthly for premium assisted living." The brochures revealed a carefully planned escape strategy that Patricia had been developing for months, while encouraging both Sarah and Michael to increase their financial dependence on me. She had been researching retirement communities near her sister Margaret in Florida, planning to abandon our family once I married, and could be manipulated into supporting everyone independently. But the real betrayal was hidden in Patricia's phone records, which she reluctantly surrendered when I threatened to leave immediately unless she came completely clean about her role in the family's deception. The text message history painted a picture of calculated manipulation that went back years. "Look at this conversation between you and Sarah from last Tuesday," I said, scrolling through messages that revealed the depth of their coordination. "You told her exactly what to say to make me feel guilty about questioning Dad's spending. You coached her on how to maximize emotional manipulation." The messages showed Patricia advising Sarah to emphasize her role as a struggling single mother, while downplaying my financial contributions in conversations with extended family. She had been the architect behind Sarah's reputation-damaging campaign, teaching her daughter how to portray me as selfish and unreliable while painting herself as the responsible family provider. "You've been managing both of them like puppets," I said, my voice filled with disgust as I realized the scope of my mother's manipulation, teaching them exactly what to say and do to keep me trapped in this cycle of financial abuse. But Patricia's betrayal went even deeper than coaching manipulation tactics. Phone records revealed that she had been actively discouraging potential romantic relationships in my life interfering with my chances for marriage and independence, because my single status made me a more reliable source of financial support. You called David's mother last year, I said, reading through her call history with growing horror. You told her that I wasn't ready for marriage because of family obligations and suggested he should find someone more available for a serious relationship. Patricia had systematically sabotaged my chances for happiness and independence, viewing me as a long-term financial plan, rather than a daughter deserving of love and support. She had convinced David's family that I was too attached to my parents to be a good wife, effectively ending my relationship before I even knew it was in jeopardy. The most devastating revelation came when I discovered that Patricia had been portraying my single status as a personal choice rather than a sacrifice I was making for family stability. She had been telling extended relatives that I was too independent for marriage and preferred career focus over family commitment, protecting the family's reputation while destroying mine. You made everyone think I chose this life, I said, tears of rage streaming down my face. You let them believe I was some career-obsessed woman who didn't want love or marriage when the truth is, I gave up both for this family. Patricia tried to justify her manipulation by claiming she was protecting me from the pressures of marriage and motherhood, but her true motives were transparent. She wanted to maintain my earning potential and availability for family emergencies without the complications that would come with my own household responsibilities. I thought you were happy helping us, she said weakly, but the evidence contradicted her claims. Text messages showed her celebrating each romantic relationship that ended, viewing my heartbreak as necessary for family financial stability. The Florida retirement planning revealed Patricia's exit strategy once I was no longer useful as the family's financial backbone. She had calculated that once I married and started my own family, my ability to support everyone else would diminish significantly. Rather than face reduced income, she planned to abandon ship and live comfortably in Florida using the savings accumulated from years of my financial support. You were going to leave us all behind, Sarah said, her voice filled with betrayal as she understood our mother's true intentions. You spent years training us to depend on Amber financially, and then you were planning to disappear when the system stopped working. Patricia's manipulation had created a family dynamic where everyone depended on me while resenting me for the very support they couldn't survive without. She had taught Michael to feel entitled to my money while maintaining his pride through ignorance of the source. She had coached Sarah to take credit for family stability while secretly relying on my hidden contributions. You turned us all against each other, I said, finally understanding the full scope of her psychological manipulation. You made Dad feel like a provider while he was actually an addict. You made Sarah feel responsible while she was completely dependent. And you made me feel guilty for wanting my own life while sacrificing everything for everyone else's comfort. The retirement brochures weren't just escape plans. They were evidence of Patricia's complete indifference to the family she had spent years manipulating for financial gain. Once my usefulness ended, she had no intention of facing the consequences of the dysfunction she had created and maintained. As I processed the magnitude of my mother's betrayal, I realized that every family crisis, every emergency, and every guilt trip had been carefully orchestrated to maintain my financial servitude while preparing for her eventual abandonment of the family system she had designed around my sacrifice. My discovery of the retirement brochures prompted me to demand complete financial transparency from my family, starting with bank statements that would reveal the true scope of our financial devastation. What I found was worse than anything I could have imagined, painting a picture of fraud and financial destruction that went far beyond gambling addiction and family manipulation. I want to see every bank statement, every loan document, and every financial record this family has. I announced, my voice carrying the authority of someone who finally understood she had been systematically deceived. No more lies. No more secrets. No more excuses. Michael reluctantly produced a shoebox filled with the financial documents he had been hiding in the basement, while Patricia retrieved additional paperwork from a filing cabinet she claimed I had never needed to see. As I spread the papers across the dining room table, the magnitude of our financial crisis became terrifyingly clear. The mortgage statements revealed that despite my 8 years of payments, totaling over $200,000, our family home was actually 6 months behind on payments and facing foreclosure proceedings that had already begun. Michael had been intercepting my mortgage payments and using them to cover gambling debts while allowing the actual mortgage to fall into default. How is this possible? I asked, holding up foreclosure notices dated 3 months earlier that none of us had ever seen. I've been making these payments directly to the mortgage company for 8 years. Michael's confession revealed a level of fraud that bordered on criminal activity. He had convinced me to make payments into a joint account that he claimed was automatically transferred to the mortgage company, but instead, he had been manually transferring only partial payments while diverting the majority of my money to cover gambling losses and personal expenses. I thought I could catch up, he said weakly, as if 8 years of theft could be explained by temporary optimism. I kept thinking my luck would turn around and I could pay everything back without anyone knowing. But the mortgage fraud was only the beginning of our financial devastation. Property tax liens dating back 3 years showed that despite my payments for what I thought were current taxes, the county had been accumulating penalties and interest on unpaid balances that now totaled over $30,000. You've been forging my signature? I said, examining loan documents that bore my name but contained handwriting that clearly belonged to my father. These home equity loans, these refinancing applications, these credit line increases, I never signed any of these documents. The forgery had allowed Michael to extract additional money from our home's equity while I was unknowingly paying the mortgage. Second mortgages, third mortgages, and home equity credit lines had turned our family residence into a financial liability rather than an asset with total debt exceeding the property's current market value. Sarah's car loan revealed another layer of deception that had been hidden from me for years. While I believed I was helping my sister maintain transportation for work and childcare, the truth was far more complicated and financially destructive. Sarah, your car was repossessed 2 years ago, I said, reading through correspondence from the finance company. The Honda I've been making payments on doesn't even exist anymore. Where has this money been going? Sarah's confession revealed that the car payment money had been redirected to cover personal expenses and credit card debt that she had accumulated through online shopping and lifestyle choices she couldn't afford. The children's medical bills I thought I was covering had actually been paid by emergency Medicaid, while my money funded Sarah's personal spending habits. I needed the money for other things, she admitted, unable to meet my eyes as the scope of her deception became clear. The kids qualified for state health care assistance, but I didn't want to tell you because I was afraid you'd stop helping with other expenses. The revelation that I had been unknowingly funding luxury purchases while believing I was covering essential family needs triggered a rage I had never experienced before. Designer handbags, expensive cosmetics, premium cable packages, and restaurant meals had been purchased with money I sacrificed while living on generic groceries and discount clothing. But the most devastating discovery came when I found evidence that my own credit score had been systematically destroyed through loans and credit accounts I never authorized. My identity had been used to secure financing that I was legally responsible for, but had never benefited from in any way. My credit report shows accounts I never opened, I said, scrolling through my phone to access credit monitoring services that revealed the full extent of identity theft within my own family. Store credit cards, personal loans, even utility accounts in my name for addresses I've never lived at. Michael had been using my social security number and forged signatures to establish credit accounts when his own creditworthiness was destroyed by gambling-related defaults. The accounts had been used to fund his addiction, while leaving me financially liable for debts I had no knowledge of until this moment. The college fund I thought I had been building for Sarah's children was completely empty, drained through systematic withdrawals that had been disguised as emergency transfers, but actually used to cover gambling losses and personal expenses. $28,000 in educational savings had vanished without any intention of replacement or repayment. "Where's the money I've been contributing to Emma and Tyler's college fund?" I asked, referencing my sister's twins who were now 12 and 14 years old. "Dad needed it for business expenses," Sarah said weakly, referring to the fictitious construction company that existed only as a cover story for Michael's unemployment and gambling activities. The scope of financial devastation was so complete that our family was essentially bankrupt while maintaining the appearance of middle-class stability through my unknowing subsidization of an unsustainable lifestyle. Every comfortable element of our lives had been funded through fraud, theft, and systematic deception, designed to extract maximum financial benefit from my love and family loyalty. As I calculated the total financial damage, I realized that my family had stolen or misappropriated over $400,000 from me over the past decade, while simultaneously destroying my credit, my savings, and my ability to build an independent financial future. Just as I was processing the devastating scope of financial fraud my immediate family had perpetrated against me, my phone rang with an incoming call from Grandmother Rose, whose timing couldn't have been more perfect for exposing yet another layer of family deception that extended far beyond our household. "Amber, sweetheart, I was just calling to check on your chemotherapy treatments." Grandmother Rose said, her voice filled with loving concern that immediately confused everyone in the room. "How are you feeling after this week's session? Your father said the doctors were adjusting your medication dosage." The silence that fell over our dining room was deafening as everyone realized that Grandmother Rose believed I was currently battling cancer, a completely fabricated medical crisis that my parents had apparently been using to extract money from extended family members who genuinely cared about my well-being. "Grandma Rose," I said, carefully putting the call on speaker so everyone could hear the conversation. "I've never had cancer or chemotherapy treatments. I'm completely healthy and have been this entire time." The confusion in my grandmother's voice was heartbreaking as she tried to process this information while remembering months of conversations with my father about my supposed medical struggles and treatment expenses. "But Michael has been calling me every few weeks asking for help with your medical bills," she said, her voice growing stronger as she began to understand the scope of deception. "I've sent $15,000 over the past 2 years to help cover your cancer treatments and recovery expenses." Michael's face turned ashen as he realized his medical fraud scheme was being exposed in real time, with no possibility of explanation that wouldn't reveal him as a systematic liar who had been scamming elderly relatives for gambling money disguised as family medical emergencies. "What kind of medical expenses? Because, sire," I asked, needing to understand the full scope of the lies that had been told in my name to people who loved and trusted our family. "Chemotherapy copays, prescription medications, nutritional supplements, transportation costs for treatment appointments." Grandmother Rose listed, her voice growing angry as she realized how thoroughly she had been deceived. "Michael sent me very detailed explanations about your treatment schedule and how much everything was costing your family financially." But the medical fraud wasn't limited to cancer treatments. As our conversation continued, Grandmother Rose revealed that she had been receiving regular updates about various health crises that had supposedly been affecting me for years, each one accompanied by specific financial needs that required immediate family assistance. "Last year, it was emergency surgery for kidney stones," she said, referencing a medical crisis I had never experienced. Before that, it was physical therapy after your car accident, and before that, it was dental surgery after you fell down the stairs at work. None of these medical events had ever occurred, but each one had generated thousands of dollars in donations from extended family members who believed they were helping me through legitimate health emergencies. My father had been systematically inventing medical crises to justify regular financial requests from relatives who would never question helping family members in genuine need. "Grandma, I need to conference in Uncle Tom," I said, suspecting that the medical fraud extended beyond my grandmother's contributions. "I think there might be other family members who need to know about this." Uncle Tom answered immediately, and his reaction to learning about the fake cancer diagnosis revealed that the medical fraud had indeed been much more extensive than just my grandmother's contributions. "Amber, thank God you're okay," he said, his voice filled with relief and growing anger. "Your mother has been organizing workplace fundraisers at the insurance office where she works part-time. She told everyone you had aggressive cancer and needed experimental treatments not covered by insurance." The workplace fundraisers had generated additional thousands of dollars through the sympathy and generosity of Patricia's coworkers who had been contributing money from their own paychecks to help a colleague's daughter battle a disease I had never been diagnosed with. "How much money did she collect?" I asked, dreading the answer, but needing to understand the full financial scope of the medical fraud scheme. "At least $8,000 over the past 18 months, Uncle Tom replied. "She's been showing people fake medical bills and treatment schedules asking for help with everything from prescription copays to travel expenses for specialist appointments." But the revelation that shocked me most came when Uncle Tom mentioned that my cousin Lisa had been organizing similar fundraisers at her workplace, creating an entire network of financial fraud that extended through multiple family members and their professional associations. "Lisa has been collecting money at the hospital where she works as a nurse." Uncle Tom continued, his voice heavy with betrayal. "She believed Patricia's stories about your medical struggles and convinced her nursing colleagues to contribute to a medical fund for you." The medical fraud had created a complex web of deception that involved forged medical documents, fake treatment schedules, and fabricated financial hardship stories that had convinced dozens of people to contribute money they could barely afford to help someone who was never actually in need. "We organized a meal train for you." Lisa's voice came through the phone as Uncle Tom called her into our conversation. "The church ladies have been bringing meals to Mom and Dad's house twice a week for 6 months because we thought you were too sick from chemotherapy to cook for the family." The meals explained why our grocery bills had been so manageable recently, despite my continued payments for family food expenses. Well-meaning church members had been providing free meals while I continued paying for groceries, creating a double financial benefit for my family through fraud and deception. Grandmother Rose's anger was growing as she understood how thoroughly she and other family members had been manipulated through their love and concern for me. "Michael, how could you lie about your daughter's health to steal money from family members who were trying to help?" she demanded, her voice carrying the moral authority of someone who had been betrayed by people she trusted completely. But the medical fraud revealed more than just financial theft. It showed how far my family was willing to go to maintain their comfortable lifestyle through deception, creating elaborate fictional scenarios that exploited the love and generosity of extended family members who would never suspect such systematic manipulation. The fake medical crises had also served another purpose. They created emotional distance between me and extended family members who were afraid of imposing on someone they believed was struggling with serious health issues. By portraying me as seriously ill, my parents had isolated me from potential support systems that might have helped me recognize and escape their financial manipulation. As my family sat in stunned silence, processing the magnitude of fraud and deception that had been systematically destroying relationships and finances for years, I realized it was time to reveal the most important secret I had been keeping. I had been documenting their behavior for months and preparing legal action that would finally hold them accountable for their crimes. "There's something else you all need to know," I said, reaching into my purse to retrieve a small digital recording device that had been documenting our entire conversation. "I've been recording our family interactions for the past 6 months, and I already have legal representation." The shock on their faces was complete as they realized that everything they had confessed during tonight's confrontation had been permanently documented for potential use in criminal and civil proceedings. My family's assumption that I was naive and trusting had prevented them from recognizing that I had been strategically gathering evidence of their fraud. "You recorded us?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper, as she understood the legal implications of everything she had admitted during our conversation. "I started recording family conversations in July when I noticed suspicious charges on my credit report." I explained, pulling out a folder containing 6 months of documentation that would support legal action against my family. "My attorney advised me to gather evidence before confronting anyone about the financial irregularities." The credit monitoring alert that had first alerted me to potential identity theft had prompted me to hire Jennifer Walsh, a lawyer specializing in family financial fraud, who had guided me through the evidence-gathering process while protecting my legal interests. What started as suspected minor financial manipulation had revealed systematic fraud that warranted both criminal prosecution and civil recovery proceedings. Jennifer has already reviewed all the evidence and filed a preliminary report with both local police and federal investigators. I continued watching my family's expressions transform from shock to genuine fear as they realized the seriousness of their legal exposure. Michael's gambling addiction had connected him to illegal offshore gambling operations that automatically triggered federal interest when combined with the identity theft and mortgage fraud. The forged signatures on loan documents constituted multiple felonies that could result in significant prison sentences for both my parents. The federal investigators are particularly interested in Dad's gambling debts because they involve money laundering through home equity loans and offshore gambling websites, I said, referencing information Jennifer had shared about the federal investigation that was already underway. But my legal preparation went beyond just documenting financial crimes. Jennifer had also advised me about protecting my own interests while ensuring that my family faced appropriate consequences for their systematic abuse of my trust and financial resources. "I've already moved my remaining savings to accounts at a different bank where none of you have access," I announced, watching the panic grow in their eyes as they realized I had been strategically planning my financial independence. "All the joint accounts that allowed Dad to steal my mortgage payments have been closed, and I've placed fraud alerts on all my credit accounts." The strategic timing of my legal preparation meant that my family's access to my money had already been cut off before tonight's confrontation, ensuring they couldn't drain my remaining resources in retaliation for exposing their crimes. Jennifer had helped me create a complete financial firewall that protected me while documenting their illegal activities. Sarah's desperation became immediately apparent as she realized the scope of legal consequences she was facing for her role in the fraud scheme. Amber, please, I have children to think about," she pleaded, finally understanding that her participation in the family's deception could result in criminal charges that would affect her custody rights. "Can't we work this out privately without involving lawyers and police?" "You should have thought about your children before you helped steal over $400,000 from me," I replied, my voice steady with the confidence that comes from knowing you have both moral authority and legal protection. "Jennifer says the evidence is strong enough to recover most of my losses through civil action, regardless of any criminal proceedings." But I wasn't finished revealing the extent of my legal preparation. Jennifer had also helped me understand that my cooperation with investigators would be crucial for building cases against other families involved in similar fraud schemes, making my situation part of a larger pattern of financial abuse that warranted serious prosecution. The investigators told Jennifer that Dad's gambling debts connect to a network of family financial fraud that they've been tracking for 2 years. I said, sharing information that revealed how my family's crimes extended beyond just our household. My evidence is helping them build cases against other families who've been using similar tactics to exploit adult children. The federal investigation meant that even if my family tried to minimize their crimes or claim they were just family financial disagreements, the evidence would be used to prosecute a larger criminal organization that specialized in teaching families how to exploit adult children through guilt manipulation and identity theft. Patricia's composure finally cracked completely as she realized that her retirement plans in Florida were being replaced by potential federal prosecution that could result in prison sentences and complete financial ruin. "We never meant for it to go this far," she said, through tears that carried no weight with me anymore. "We just needed help getting through difficult times, and it became harder and harder to tell you the truth." "You didn't need help getting through difficult times," I corrected her, my voice filled with the clarity that comes from finally understanding the truth. "You created difficult times by choosing gambling addiction, financial fraud, and systematic manipulation over honest communication and responsible behavior." Jennifer had helped me understand that my family's behavior wasn't the result of temporary financial stress, but rather a deliberate pattern of exploitation designed to extract maximum financial benefit from my love and loyalty while destroying my ability to build an independent life. The recording device I had been using was just one element of the comprehensive evidence package that Jennifer had helped me assemble over months of careful documentation. Bank records, forged signatures, medical fraud evidence, and witness testimony from extended family members created an overwhelming case for both criminal prosecution and civil recovery that my family had no realistic defense against. After revealing my legal preparation and evidence gathering, I stood up from the dinner table and walked toward the front door, carrying with me the keys, credit cards, and checkbook that had given my family access to my financial resources for the past decade. The weight of those items felt symbolic as I placed them on the kitchen counter, officially ending my role as the family's unwilling financial provider. "I'm leaving tonight, and I won't be coming back," I announced, my voice carrying the finality of someone who had reached a point of no return. "You'll need to figure out how to support yourselves without stealing from me anymore." I removed the house key from my keychain and placed it next to the credit cards, followed by the checkbook for our joint account that Michael had been using to intercept my mortgage payments. Each item represented a connection to the financial abuse that had controlled my life for 10 years, and releasing them felt like breaking chains that had kept me trapped in a cycle of exploitation. "Amber, please don't do this," Patricia begged, finally understanding that her manipulation tactics no longer had power over someone who knew the full truth about our family's dynamics. "We can work together to fix these problems. Families should support each other through difficult times." "Families should support each other," I agreed, turning to look at them one final time. "But what we've had isn't family support. It's been systematic financial abuse disguised as family loyalty, and I refuse to enable it anymore." I walked out of the house and drove directly to my best friend Melissa's apartment, where I had been secretly storing personal belongings for weeks in preparation for this moment. Melissa had known about my situation for months and had been helping me plan my escape while providing emotional support through the evidence-gathering process. "How did it go?" Melissa asked as I collapsed onto her couch, emotionally drained but relieved to finally be free from the toxic environment that had been consuming my life for a decade. "Better than expected," I said, showing her the recordings and evidence that would protect me legally while ensuring my family faced appropriate consequences for their crimes. Jennifer was right about documenting everything. They confessed to much more than I expected. Meanwhile, back at my family's house, the immediate consequences of losing access to my financial support began materializing with devastating speed. Within 2 hours of my departure, the electricity was shut off because the utility company had been waiting for a payment that was already 3 months overdue. My phone started receiving frantic calls from my family as they discovered that their comfortable lifestyle had been built entirely on my financial contributions, with no backup plan for maintaining basic household necessities without my support. Amber, the power just went out. Sarah's voice came through my phone, panic evident as she realized the scope of their dependency. The utility company says we owe $800 and they won't restore service until it's paid in full. Then you'll need to find $800, I replied calmly, no longer feeling responsible for solving problems that my family had created through their own poor choices and fraudulent behavior. But the utility shutoff was just the beginning of their immediate crisis. The mortgage company called within hours, demanding payment on the 6 months of missed payments that would determine whether foreclosure proceedings would continue or be halted through immediate payment of the total amount due. The bank wants $18,000 by Friday or they're proceeding with foreclosure. Michael's voice came through another panicked phone call. Amber, you can't let us lose the house over a family argument. It's not a family argument, I corrected him. It's the natural consequence of stealing mortgage payments for 8 years to fund gambling addiction while lying to everyone about your financial responsibilities. Sarah's car situation became the next crisis to emerge as the finance company repossessed what remained of her vehicle when they discovered the payments I had been making were actually going to fund personal expenses rather than the loan that had been in default for over a year. They took my car, Sarah called crying, finally experiencing the consequences of her financial deception. How am I supposed to get to work or take the kids to school without transportation? You'll figure it out the same way millions of other people manage transportation without stealing from family members. I replied, refusing to be drawn back into solving problems that weren't my responsibility to fix. The credit cards that my family had been using for everyday expenses were declined at the grocery store when Patricia attempted to buy food for dinner, discovering that the accounts had been frozen due to the fraud alerts I had placed on my credit profile. None of our credit cards are working, Patricia called in desperation. The grocery store clerk said there's some kind of hold on all our accounts. We don't even have money for food. Then you'll need to use your own money and your own credit accounts, I said, reminding her that functional adults typically use their own financial resources for their own expenses. But perhaps the most devastating immediate consequence was the collection calls that began within hours as creditors who had been patiently waiting for payments suddenly realized that the source of family income had permanently disappeared. Payday lenders, casino debt collectors, and credit card companies started calling with demands for immediate payment of balances that totaled over $100,000. People keep calling about money Dad owes, Sarah reported through increasingly panicked phone calls. Some of them are threatening legal action if payments aren't made immediately. Dad will need to deal with his creditors directly, I said, no longer willing to protect my father from the consequences of his gambling addiction and financial irresponsibility. The speed with which their comfortable lifestyle collapsed revealed just how completely they had been depending on my financial support for every aspect of their daily existence. Without my income to cover utilities, mortgage, food, transportation, and debt payments, they were immediately thrust into a financial crisis that exposed the reality of their situation. Melissa watched me handle the increasingly desperate phone calls with admiration for my newfound strength and clarity about appropriate boundaries with family members who had systematically abused my trust and generosity. I'm proud of you for finally putting yourself first, she said as I turned off my phone to avoid additional manipulation attempts. They created this situation through their own choices, and it's not your responsibility to fix it anymore. As I settled into Melissa's guest room for the night, I felt a combination of relief and sadness that marked the end of one chapter of my life and the beginning of something entirely different. For the first time in a decade, I would wake up tomorrow without the burden of supporting people who had never appreciated my sacrifices and had actively worked to prevent me from building my own independent life. Over the next few days, my family's desperation intensified as they realized that their comfortable lifestyle had been completely dependent on financial resources they no longer had access to. Their initial panic transformed into increasingly sophisticated manipulation, attempts designed to regain control over my money and restore their previous standard of living through guilt threats and false promises of change. Sarah was the first to attempt a new manipulation strategy, appearing at Melissa's apartment unannounced with Emma and Tyler in tow, hoping that seeing her children would trigger my protective instincts and override my logical decision to maintain financial boundaries. Amber, please, the kids don't understand why they can't have their normal routine, Sarah said, positioning her children strategically where I could see their confused faces through the doorway. Emma keeps asking why the electricity doesn't work, and Tyler wants to know why mommy is crying all the time. The manipulation was transparent, but emotionally challenging because I genuinely cared about my niece and nephew who were innocent victims of their mother's financial irresponsibility and participation in family fraud. However, Jennifer had prepared me for exactly this type of emotional manipulation and had advised me about maintaining boundaries while protecting the children's legitimate interests. Sarah, the children qualify for emergency assistance programs if you apply through social services, I said, providing factual information without accepting responsibility for problems I hadn't created. There are programs specifically designed to help families transition through financial crises. But Sarah's visit wasn't just about emotional manipulation through her children. She revealed that the family had been attempting to freeze my bank accounts and credit cards, not realizing that I had already moved my money to financial institutions they had no access to or knowledge of. "We tried to stop the transfers you made to other banks," she admitted, apparently believing that admitting to attempted financial sabotage would somehow convince me to restore their access to my resources. "Dad thought if we could freeze your accounts, you would have to use the joint accounts again." The attempted financial sabotage backfired spectacularly because they were only able to freeze empty accounts that I had deliberately left accessible to document their continued attempts at unauthorized access. Jennifer had advised me to maintain the old accounts with minimal balances specifically to create evidence of ongoing financial crimes. "You tried to freeze accounts that I moved my money from weeks ago," I explained, showing Sarah bank statements that revealed her family had been targeting accounts with less than $50 in combined balances. "All you accomplished was creating more evidence of attempted financial manipulation for the investigators." Patricia's manipulation attempts were more sophisticated, involving extended family members who had been fed carefully crafted stories about our family conflict that portrayed me as mentally unstable and financially irresponsible. She had been calling relatives to convince them that my decision to cut off financial support was evidence of psychological problems requiring family intervention. "Aunt Linda called me," Melissa reported, after intercepting several calls meant to reach me through mutual family connections. "Your mother told her that you're having some kind of nervous breakdown and making irrational financial decisions that are hurting everyone." The psychological manipulation campaign was designed to isolate me from potential support systems while convincing extended family members to pressure me into resuming financial support for my parents and sister. Patricia had been telling relatives that I was refusing to help family members in genuine crisis carefully omitting any mention of the fraud, gambling addiction, or systematic deception that had created the crisis. She's telling people that you suddenly became selfish and decided to punish the family for minor financial disagreements. Melissa continued sharing information that revealed the scope of Patricia's reputation management campaign. Aunt Linda wanted to stage some kind of intervention to help you see how much you're hurting everyone. But Patricia's manipulation campaign backfired when Grandmother Rose and Uncle Tom began sharing information about the medical fraud and false emergency schemes that had been used to extract money from extended family members for years. The relatives Patricia was trying to recruit as allies became advocates for me once they understood the true nature of our family's financial dynamics. Cousin Jenny is furious about the fake cancer story, Melissa reported after speaking with family members who were comparing notes about the various deception campaigns they had unknowingly supported. She's been telling everyone about the lies she witnessed at family gatherings. Michael's manipulation attempts were the most desperate and potentially dangerous, involving threats and intimidation designed to force me into resuming financial support through fear rather than guilt or family loyalty. His gambling addiction had connected him to people who use violence to collect debts, and he was now facing pressure that he was trying to redirect toward me. Some men came to the house looking for Dad, Sarah reported through a panicked phone call. They said he owes money to people who don't accept excuses, and they wanted to know about family assets that could be used for payment. The debt collectors were from illegal lending operations that Michael had borrowed from when traditional creditors stopped extending him credit due to his gambling-related defaults. These lenders had no interest in legal proceedings and were focused on immediate recovery of their money through whatever means necessary. Dad told them that you have savings accounts and property that could cover his debts. Sarah continued revealing that Michael was now actively endangering my safety by providing my personal information to criminals who specialized in violent debt collection. He gave them your work address and told them about the money you've been saving for graduate school. She added, apparently not understanding that sharing this information put me at serious risk from people who had no respect for legal boundaries or personal safety. Jennifer immediately contacted law enforcement about the threats and advised me to take additional security precautions while the investigation into Michael's illegal gambling debts proceeded. The threats elevated my family's financial crimes from civil matters to criminal cases involving organized crime and potential violence. The federal investigators are very interested in Michael's connections to illegal lending operations, Jennifer reported after meeting with law enforcement officials. His gambling debts have connected him to a criminal network that they've been trying to penetrate for months. But perhaps the most revealing manipulation attempt came when my family tried to access life insurance policies that listed me as a beneficiary, apparently believing they could somehow collect on policies while I was still alive. The insurance fraud attempt demonstrated just how far they were willing to go to maintain access to money they felt entitled to, despite their systematic betrayal of my trust. The insurance company called to verify some paperwork that your father submitted, Jennifer reported after the insurance company contacted her office about suspicious documentation. He was trying to collect on policies by claiming you had died in a car accident. The insurance fraud attempt was so obviously criminal that it triggered immediate investigation by both the insurance company's fraud department and law enforcement officials who were already building cases against my family for their other financial crimes. Michael apparently thought that if he could collect on your life insurance policies, he could use that money to cover his gambling debts while claiming you were unavailable to dispute the financial arrangements. Jennifer explained, showing me copies of the forged death certificates and fraudulent insurance claims that Michael had submitted. The insurance fraud revealed the depth of Michael's desperation and his complete willingness to destroy my life entirely if it would solve his financial problems. The man who had raised me was now literally trying to erase my existence to access money that would fund his continued gambling addiction. As I processed the various manipulation attempts my family had employed over the past week, I realized that cutting off their financial access had revealed their true priorities and moral character in ways that years of gradual discovery never could have accomplished. Their immediate response to losing access to my money was to escalate their criminal behavior rather than address the underlying problems that had created their financial crisis. "They've shown you who they really are," Melissa observed as we reviewed the week's events from the safety of her apartment. "None of them tried to apologize or change their behavior. They just tried to find new ways to force you back into the same situation." The manipulation attempts had failed because Jennifer had prepared me for exactly these tactics, while ensuring I had both legal protection and practical safety measures that prevented my family from regaining control over my financial resources or personal security. Within 10 days of my walking out of the family dinner, Detective Williams from the Hamilton County Financial Crimes Unit contacted me to schedule an interview about my family's fraudulent activities. What I had initially thought would be a simple case of family financial dispute had escalated into a complex federal investigation involving money laundering, identity theft, and connections to organized criminal enterprises. Miss Thompson, your cooperation has been invaluable in helping us understand a much larger pattern of financial fraud, Detective Williams explained as he reviewed the evidence Jennifer and I had compiled over months of careful documentation. "Your father's gambling debts have connected him to an illegal offshore gambling operation that we've been investigating for over 2 years. The federal investigation had been tracking suspicious financial transactions involving home equity loans that were being used to launder money through offshore gambling websites and illegal betting operations. Michael's forged loan documents and identity theft had triggered automatic reporting requirements that brought his activities to the attention of investigators who specialized in financial crimes. The pattern of behavior you've documented matches what we've seen in 15 other families across Ohio and Kentucky." Detective Williams continued showing me files that revealed the scope of the criminal organization my family had become involved with. Adult children being systematically exploited through guilt manipulation, while their identities are used for fraudulent financial transactions. But the investigation revealed something even more disturbing than I had imagined. The gambling addiction and family financial fraud were not separate issues, but rather connected elements of a sophisticated criminal enterprise that taught vulnerable people how to exploit their own families for money that would ultimately flow to organized crime operations. "Your father received training on family manipulation tactics," Detective Williams explained, showing me evidence that Michael had attended seminars and received coaching on psychological manipulation techniques designed to maximize financial extraction from family members. "This isn't just gambling addiction, it's organized exploitation." The training materials revealed that Michael had been taught specific strategies for identifying which family members were most likely to provide financial support, how to create artificial emergencies that would justify immediate financial requests, and how to use guilt and family loyalty to prevent victims from questioning or investigating the use of their money. The medical fraud involving your extended family members was also taught as part of this program. Detective Williams continued showing me templates for fake medical crises that were being used by multiple families across several states. Your grandmother's story about cancer treatments matches almost exactly what we've seen in dozens of other cases. Patricia's role in coordinating the manipulation had also been more extensive than any of us had realized. She had been attending workshops on family psychology and manipulation techniques, learning how to identify and exploit the emotional vulnerabilities that would make me most susceptible to continued financial exploitation. Your mother's text message coaching of your sister follows a specific psychological manipulation protocol that we've seen taught at these family fraud seminars. Detective Williams showed me comparing my family's manipulation tactics to identical strategies being used by other criminal families in the network. But perhaps the most shocking revelation was that Sarah's children were being used as leverage in ways that extended far beyond the emotional manipulation I had witnessed. The fake college fund and medical care had been designed to create long-term financial obligations that would keep me trapped in the exploitation cycle for decades. The plan was to convince you to adopt or gain legal custody of your sister's children. Detective Williams explained, showing me documents that outlined a long-term exploitation strategy that would have made me legally responsible for supporting Sarah's family indefinitely. Once you had legal obligations to the children leaving the family, financial system would become much more difficult. Sarah's apparent financial irresponsibility had actually been carefully calculated to create circumstances that would force me to take greater responsibility for her children's welfare, ultimately trapping me in a cycle of obligation that would have continued for decades, even if I had discovered the fraud. Child Services is now investigating the children's living situation because using minors as leverage for financial fraud creates an unsafe environment that requires intervention. Detective Williams informed me, revealing that Emma and Tyler were being evaluated for placement with relatives who weren't involved in criminal activities. The federal investigation had already resulted in charges being filed against Michael and Patricia for multiple felonies, including identity theft, mortgage fraud, wire fraud, and money laundering. Sarah was facing related charges for her participation in the financial deception, but her cooperation with investigators was being considered in determining the severity of her prosecution. Your father is looking at 15 to 20 years in federal prison if convicted on all charges, Detective Williams explained, outlining the potential sentences for the various crimes my family had committed. Your mother faces similar charges, and your sister's sentence will depend largely on her continued cooperation with our investigation. But the criminal charges were only part of the legal consequences my family was facing. The civil recovery process that Jennifer was managing would allow me to recover much of the money that had been stolen through fraudulent means, regardless of the outcomes of criminal proceedings. The federal court has frozen all assets connected to your family's fraudulent activities, Jennifer reported during our weekly meeting to discuss legal developments. The house vehicles, bank accounts, and even personal property purchased with stolen funds are now under court control pending resolution of your civil case. These asset frees meant that my family was facing not only potential prison sentences, but also complete financial ruin, as everything they had purchased with stolen money was being seized for potential return to me through court-ordered restitution. We've identified over $300,000 in recoverable assets. Jennifer continued explaining the civil recovery process that would restore much of my financial losses, regardless of whether my family could actually pay restitution from their own resources. The federal investigation had also revealed that my family's crimes were much more extensive than I had initially discovered. Additional victims were identified as investigators traced the network of illegal gambling operations and family fraud schemes that Michael and Patricia had been participating in for years. Your willingness to come forward has helped us identify 12 other families who were being victimized through similar schemes. Detective Williams reported during one of our investigative interviews, your evidence is being used to build cases that will protect dozens of other people from ongoing exploitation. The scope of the criminal network made my situation part of a much larger law enforcement effort to dismantle organized crime operations that specialized in teaching families how to exploit their own relatives for money that would ultimately benefit illegal gambling and money laundering enterprises. Your family was both perpetrator and victim in this scheme. Detective Williams explained, helping me understand that Michael's gambling addiction had been deliberately cultivated and exploited by criminals who specialized in creating financially desperate people who would commit fraud against their own families. But perhaps the most important legal consequence was the federal legislation being drafted to strengthen protections against family financial abuse, using evidence from my case and others to create new legal tools for prosecuting these types of crimes. Your case is being cited in congressional testimony about the need for stronger laws protecting adults from financial abuse by family members. Jennifer reported, showing me legislative proposals that would make family financial fraud easier to prosecute and provide better protection for victims. The legal consequences were transforming my personal trauma into meaningful change that would protect other families from experiencing similar exploitation, giving my suffering a broader purpose that helped me process the emotional pain of losing my family relationships. 3 weeks after walking out of my family's house, I was beginning to rebuild my life with the support of people who genuinely cared about my well-being rather than my financial resources. The process of establishing independence after a decade of exploitation was challenging, but each day brought new evidence that I had made the right decision in choosing freedom over continued abuse. Melissa had become more than just a friend providing temporary shelter. She was actively helping me navigate the practical challenges of starting over while providing the emotional support I needed to process years of psychological manipulation. Her spare bedroom had become my sanctuary while I searched for my own apartment and rebuilt the personal relationships that my family had systematically undermined. I've been thinking about what you said about feeling guilty for enjoying simple pleasures, Melissa said during one of our evening conversations about my recovery process. When was the last time you bought something for yourself just because you wanted it, not because it was necessary? The question revealed how completely my family's financial exploitation had conditioned me to view personal spending as selfish and irresponsible. I hadn't purchased anything purely for enjoyment in over 8 years, viewing every dollar as potentially needed for family emergencies that I now understood had been largely fabricated to maintain their comfortable lifestyle. I can't even remember. I admitted, realizing that my entire adult life had been spent in a state of artificial financial crisis created by people who wanted to ensure I remained available as their personal funding source. But rebuilding my sense of personal worth and healthy financial boundaries was only part of my recovery process. The most unexpected and healing development came when Jennifer informed me that someone from my past had been following my legal case and wanted to reconnect under the new circumstances. Amber, I have someone here who would like to speak with you, Jennifer said during what I thought was a routine legal consultation. David Richardson has been in contact with my office through his attorney, and he's asked for permission to reach out to you directly. David, my former fiancé, whose proposal I had rejected 3 years earlier because I couldn't afford both a wedding and my family's endless financial needs. The man I had convinced myself to forget because maintaining our relationship seemed impossible while supporting everyone else's lifestyle through my sacrifice. David wants to talk to me. I asked, my voice barely above a whisper as I processed the possibility that the love I had given up might still exist, despite years of separation and silence. He's been following your legal case through mutual connections with my law firm, Jennifer explained, showing me correspondence that revealed David had been monitoring my situation from a distance while respecting the boundaries I had established when ending our relationship. When David walked into Jennifer's office 20 minutes later, the years of separation seemed to disappear as I looked into the eyes of the man who had wanted to build a life with me before my family's manipulation made that dream seem impossible. He looked older, more mature, but his smile was exactly as I remembered from the day I had broken his heart by returning his engagement ring. Amber, he said simply, and the way he spoke my name carried 3 years of longing and patient hope that took my breath away. "I thought you would hate me," I said, tears streaming down my face as I remembered the pain I had caused him by choosing my family's financial needs over our future together. "I never stopped loving you," David replied, sitting down across from me, while Jennifer quietly left to give us privacy for the conversation I had dreamed about but never believed could happen. The story David told me about the past 3 years revealed that our breakup had been even more manipulated by my family than I had realized. Patricia had contacted David's mother multiple times, convincing her that I was too emotionally unstable and financially irresponsible to be a good wife and mother. "My mother kept telling me that your family was concerned about your mental health and thought marriage would be too much pressure for you," David explained, showing me text messages that documented Patricia's systematic campaign to convince his family that I was unsuitable for marriage. She told them I was having emotional problems. I asked, horrified, to learn that my mother had been destroying my romantic relationship while pretending to support my happiness and future. She said you were struggling with anxiety and depression related to financial stress, and that taking on the responsibilities of marriage and eventual motherhood would probably trigger a complete breakdown. David continued revealing manipulation tactics that had been designed to ensure my continued availability as a family's financial resource. But David's revelation included something even more important than exposing my family's sabotage of our relationship. He had never believed Patricia's stories about my emotional instability and had been waiting for an opportunity to reconnect once I was free from their manipulation. "I knew something wasn't right about the way your family described your situation," he said, taking my hands in his as we talked. "The woman I fell in love with was strong, intelligent, and emotionally healthy. The picture your mother painted never matched the person I knew you to be." David had spent the past 3 years building his veterinary practice while saving money and hoping for a chance to rebuild the relationship that my family's interference had destroyed. He had never dated anyone seriously since our breakup, focusing on his career while waiting for circumstances to change. "I've been following your situation through Melissa's sister Jennifer since you started gathering evidence against your family," he admitted, revealing that my legal team had been quietly keeping him informed about my progress toward independence. "Jennifer has been updating you about my case," I asked, surprised to learn that my attorney had been maintaining contact with David throughout my legal proceedings. "She thought you should know that someone who genuinely loved you was waiting for you to be free from your family's manipulation," David explained, showing me that my support system had been larger than I realized even during the darkest moments of discovering my family's betrayal. But David's presence represented more than just romantic possibility. He offered validation that healthy relationships were based on mutual support rather than financial exploitation. His willingness to wait for me while building his own independent life provided a model for the kind of partnership I had never experienced. "I want you to know that I don't need anything from you financially," he said, addressing concerns that my family's manipulation had made me fearful about trusting anyone's motives. "I've built a successful practice, bought my own house, and saved enough money for both of us to be comfortable regardless of your financial situation." The conversation with David helped me understand that love and financial security could coexist without the manipulation and exploitation that had characterized my family relationships. He represented the possibility of building a life based on mutual respect and genuine care rather than the conditional love I had experienced from people who valued me primarily for my earning potential. As we talked through the afternoon, I began to envision a future that included both personal happiness and financial independence, something I had been trained to believe was impossible or selfish to want. David's patient love offered hope that the sacrifices I had made weren't permanent losses, but rather investments in my eventual freedom to choose relationships based on genuine affection rather than obligation. I know this is complicated timing with everything you're dealing with legally and emotionally, David said as our conversation drew to a close. I don't want to pressure you into anything, but I want you to know that my feelings haven't changed, and I'm willing to wait as long as you need to figure out what you want for your future. The offer of unconditional love and patience stood in stark contrast to my family's demands for immediate financial sacrifice and their threats of abandonment if I didn't meet their expectations. For the first time in years, I felt hopeful about the possibility of building a life that included both personal fulfillment and healthy relationships. 6 weeks after the family dinner confrontation, Sarah appeared at Melissa's apartment without her children, looking haggard and emotionally broken, in a way that immediately signaled something significant had changed in her situation. Her usual confidence was replaced by genuine remorse and fear as she asked if we could talk privately about the legal consequences that were destroying her life. Amber, I need to tell you something that's going to make everything worse, but I can't live with keeping it secret anymore, Sarah said, her voice shaking with the weight of whatever revelation she was preparing to share. The confession that followed revealed layers of family manipulation that were even darker than anything I had previously discovered, painting a picture of long-term psychological abuse designed to keep me trapped in financial servitude through the most sophisticated emotional manipulation I could have imagined. Mom and Dad weren't just planning to take your money. Sarah began pulling out documents that she had stolen from our parents' house before the federal agents seized all their records. They were planning to have you declared mentally incompetent so they could gain legal control of your inheritance from Grandmother Rose. The documents revealed that Patricia and Michael had been consulting with attorneys about guardianship procedures that would have allowed them to take control of my finances by claiming I was psychologically unable to manage my own affairs. The medical fraud involving my supposed cancer treatments had been designed to establish a paper trail of mental health issues that could be used to support an incompetency claim. They were going to use fake medical records and testimony from doctors they bribed to say that your cancer treatments had caused psychological damage that made you unable to handle financial decisions. Sarah continued showing me correspondence with corrupt medical professionals who specialized in providing false testimony for guardianship fraud cases. The guardianship scheme represented the most sophisticated level of family financial abuse, involving legal manipulation that would have stripped me of all civil rights while giving my parents complete control over my income savings and any inheritance I might receive from other family members. Grandmother Rose has been planning to leave you her house and savings when she dies, Sarah revealed, showing me copies of estate planning documents that our parents had somehow obtained illegally. Mom and Dad were going to use the guardianship to take control of everything, including property worth over $400,000. But Sarah's revelations went beyond just guardianship fraud. She admitted that Emma and Tyler had been deliberately kept distant from me as part of a long-term manipulation strategy designed to create emotional leverage that could be used if other forms of control failed. Mom coached me on keeping the kids away from you unless we needed you to feel guilty about something, Sarah said, crying as she confessed to deliberately limiting my relationship with my niece and nephew. She said that if you got too attached to them, you might try to interfere with how we raise them or demand more involvement in their lives. The emotional isolation had been designed to ensure that my attachment to the children remained strong enough to motivate financial support, but not deep enough to give me any sense of authority or involvement in their well-being. I had been kept at exactly the right distance to be useful but not empowered. I started recording conversations with Mom and Dad after you left. Sarah continued producing a small digital recorder that contained hours of discussions between our parents about their criminal activities and future plans for exploiting other family members. The recordings revealed that my departure had not prompted any genuine self-reflection or desire to change their behavior. Instead, Patricia and Michael had been planning to target other family members for financial exploitation while working to discredit my legal case through character assassination and false evidence. They were going to try to convince Uncle Tom to mortgage his house to pay for Dad's legal defense. Sarah played excerpts from conversations that showed our parents attempting to spread their financial crisis to extended family members who had already been victimized through the medical fraud schemes. But perhaps the most devastating recording was a conversation between Patricia and Michael discussing their complete lack of remorse for the damage they had caused to my life and relationships. Ooh, Mom said she didn't feel guilty because you were always going to be single anyway, and at least this way, your money was helping family instead of being wasted on someone who would never appreciate normal family life. Sarah played the recording that revealed my mother's true opinion of my worth and potential. The recording demonstrated that even after being exposed and facing criminal prosecution, my parents viewed their exploitation as justified because they believed I was inherently less deserving of happiness and independence than other family members. Dad said that children owe their parents financial support regardless of the circumstances, and that you were just being selfish by putting your own wants ahead of family needs. Sarah continued playing recordings that showed Michael's complete inability to understand appropriate family boundaries. But Sarah's decision to cooperate fully with investigators hadn't been motivated entirely by guilt or desire to make amends. Child Protective Services had removed Emma and Tyler from her custody when the criminal investigation revealed that the household had been supported entirely through fraudulent activities, creating an unsafe environment for children. I lost custody of my kids because of this, Sarah said, breaking down completely as she explained the consequences that had finally motivated her to break away from our parents' manipulation. They're staying with Aunt Linda temporarily, while I complete court-ordered counseling and prove I can support them without criminal activity. The custody loss had shattered Sarah's loyalty to our parents because she finally understood that their manipulation had cost her the thing she valued most, her relationship with her children. The realization that she might permanently lose Emma and Tyler had broken through years of psychological conditioning that had made her complicit in family fraud. I've been going to therapy twice a week to understand how Mom and Dad manipulated all of us. Sarah continued showing me documentation of court-ordered psychological counseling that was helping her recognize the systematic abuse that had shaped our family dynamics for decades. The therapeutic process had helped Sarah understand that our parents had deliberately created competition between us as siblings, ensuring that we would be too focused on competing for their approval to recognize the abuse we were both experiencing in different ways. The therapist says that Mom turned us against each other so we wouldn't compare notes and figure out what was really happening. Sarah explained sharing insights from counseling sessions that were helping her understand the psychological manipulation that had controlled our entire family system. But Sarah's cooperation with the investigation was revealing evidence that went far beyond our immediate family's crimes. The recordings and documents she had provided were helping federal investigators understand the full scope of the criminal organization that had been teaching families how to exploit their own relatives. The FBI agent told me that our family's case is being used as evidence in a federal racketeering investigation that involves dozens of families across multiple states. Sarah reported, explaining how our personal trauma was contributing to a larger effort to dismantle the criminal network that had victimized us while teaching us to victimize each other. The federal investigation was revealing that families like ours were both perpetrators and victims of sophisticated criminal enterprises that specialized in destroying family relationships for financial gain, while funneling money to organized crime operations through gambling addiction and fraud schemes. Detective Williams says that if I continue cooperating and complete all the court requirements, I might be able to get my children back within 6 months. Sarah said, showing me the motivation that was driving her genuine effort to break free from our parents' manipulation and rebuild her life based on honest relationships and legal financial support. The possibility of reconciliation with Sarah was complicated by years of betrayal and manipulation, but her willingness to face legal consequences while working to protect her children demonstrated a level of courage and genuine change that gave me hope that at least one family relationship might be salvageable through honest communication and mutual respect. 4 months after walking away from my family's dinner table, I sat in federal court watching my parents receive sentences that would ensure they faced serious consequences for years of financial fraud and psychological manipulation. The courtroom was filled with other victims of the criminal network that had taught families how to exploit their own relatives, transforming our personal trauma into a larger story of justice and recovery. Judge Patricia Morrison announced the sentences with gravity that reflected the seriousness of crimes that had destroyed multiple families while funneling millions of dollars to organized criminal enterprises through systematic exploitation of family loyalty and love. Michael Thompson, you are sentenced to 18 years in federal prison for identity theft, wire fraud, money laundering, and racketeering conspiracy. Judge Morrison said, her voice carrying the weight of justice that had been months in the making. Patricia Thompson, you are sentenced to 15 years in federal prison for wire fraud, conspiracy to commit identity theft, and elder abuse. The sentences were longer than I had expected, reflecting not only the crimes against me, but also the broader criminal conspiracy that federal investigators had uncovered through evidence my family had provided. Agent Rodriguez had explained that our case had become the cornerstone of a major federal prosecution that dismantled an entire criminal organization. Your willingness to cooperate with this investigation has resulted in the arrest and prosecution of 43 individuals involved in family financial fraud schemes across 7 states. Agent Rodriguez reported during the sentencing hearing. The evidence you provided has protected hundreds of potential victims from ongoing exploitation. The federal investigation had revealed that the criminal network specializing in family financial abuse was much larger and more sophisticated than anyone had initially understood. Training seminars, psychological manipulation protocols, and legal fraud techniques had been systematically taught to vulnerable families who became both perpetrators and victims of complex criminal enterprises. This organization was generating over $15 million annually through family exploitation schemes that ultimately funneled money to illegal gambling operations and money laundering enterprises. Agent Rodriguez continued explaining the scope of the criminal network that my family's prosecution had helped dismantle. But the most meaningful aspect of the sentencing was the victim impact testimony that allowed me to address the psychological and financial damage that years of manipulation had caused to my life relationships and future prospects. Your Honor, the defendants didn't just steal money from me, I said, reading from a statement I had prepared with Jennifer's guidance. They stole my ability to trust family relationships. They destroyed my romantic relationship through deliberate sabotage, and they used my love for them as a weapon against my own happiness and independence. The victim impact statement allowed me to articulate the full scope of damage that extended far beyond financial losses to include psychological trauma, relationship destruction, and years of delayed personal development that could never be fully recovered or compensated. They taught me to believe that wanting my own life was selfish, that healthy boundaries were betrayal, and that my value as a person was determined entirely by my willingness to sacrifice my own needs for everyone else's comfort. I continued addressing not only the judge, but also other victims in the courtroom who had experienced similar manipulation. The courtroom impact of my testimony was immediate and powerful, with several other victims crying as they recognized their own experiences in the psychological manipulation I described. The family financial abuse had followed similar patterns across multiple households, creating shared trauma that was finally being acknowledged and addressed through legal consequences. But the sentencing hearing also included positive developments that represented hope and recovery rather than just punishment and consequences. Sarah's testimony as a cooperating witness demonstrated genuine remorse and understanding of the damage that family manipulation had caused to everyone involved. I want to apologize to my sister for participating in a system that exploited her love and generosity for years, Sarah said during her own statement to the court. I'm committed to rebuilding my life based on honest relationships and legal financial support, and I hope someday Amber can forgive me for the pain I caused her. Sarah's sentence reflected her cooperation with investigators and genuine effort to break free from our parents' manipulation. She received probation and community service rather than prison time, with requirements for continued counseling and regular reporting to ensure she maintained the progress she had made in understanding healthy family relationships. The court recognizes that Sarah Thompson was also a victim of systematic psychological manipulation, while acknowledging her responsibility for choices that caused harm to others. Judge Morrison explained balancing accountability with recognition of the complex dynamics that had shaped Sarah's behavior for years. The civil recovery process had been equally successful, with Jennifer's work resulting in the return of over $300,000 through asset seizure and restitution orders that would continue generating payments for years as my parents' criminal assets were liquidated through court-supervised processes. The court has ordered full restitution of documented financial losses, plus interest and penalties that reflect the seriousness of the financial crimes committed against you, Jennifer reported after the final civil judgment was entered. You will also receive compensation from the Federal Victim Restitution Fund that provides additional recovery for victims of organized criminal enterprises. But perhaps the most meaningful aspect of justice and recovery was the federal legislation that had been passed partly in response to evidence from our case and similar family financial abuse prosecutions. The Family Financial Protection Act created new legal tools for prosecuting family financial abuse while providing better support services for victims. Your courage in coming forward has resulted in legal changes that will protect thousands of other families from experiencing similar exploitation, Agent Rodriguez said during our final investigative interview. The legislation includes mandatory reporting requirements, enhanced penalties for family financial fraud, and funding for victim support services. The legislative impact transformed our personal trauma into meaningful change that would protect other families from the systematic manipulation and exploitation we had experienced. Congressional testimony had cited our case as evidence of the need for stronger legal protections against family financial abuse. David's presence throughout the legal proceedings had provided personal support while representing the possibility of rebuilding relationships based on genuine love and mutual respect rather than financial obligation and manipulation. I'm proud of your strength in facing all of this, David said as we left the courthouse after the final sentencing hearing. You've not only protected yourself, but helped protect countless other families from similar abuse. The recovery process was ongoing rather than complete, involving continued counseling to address the psychological impacts of years of manipulation while building new relationships based on healthy boundaries and genuine mutual respect. Recovery from family financial abuse takes time because it involves rebuilding your entire sense of what healthy relationships look like. My therapist, Dr. Sarah Chen, explained during one of our weekly sessions, you're learning to trust your own judgment and value your own needs after years of being conditioned to prioritize everyone else's wants over your own well-being. The therapeutic process was helping me understand that the psychological manipulation had been as damaging as the financial theft, requiring deliberate effort to develop healthy relationship patterns that hadn't been modeled during my childhood and young adulthood. But the most hopeful aspect of justice and recovery was the growing relationship with extended family members who had also been victimized by my parents' manipulation, but were now working together to rebuild honest family connections based on mutual support rather than exploitation. Grandmother Rose wants to have Sunday dinners at her house so we can all stay connected without the manipulation and drama, Cousin Jenny reported during one of our regular phone conversations about family healing. She says that real family relationships should make people stronger, not weaker. The Sunday dinners represented the possibility of experiencing healthy family dynamics for the first time in my adult life, providing models for relationships based on genuine care rather than financial obligation or psychological manipulation. 1 year after walking out of that disastrous family dinner, I stood in Grandmother Rose's garden surrounded by people who genuinely loved and supported me, preparing to marry David in a ceremony that represented everything I had sacrificed years ago but finally reclaimed through courage and legal action. The small gathering included only people who had earned their place through consistent love and respect, rather than demands for financial support. Grandmother Rose walked me down the aisle, having become the mother figure I had never experienced but always deserved. Her house had been gifted to David and me as a wedding present, along with her blessing for a marriage built on mutual respect rather than financial obligation. The property transfer represented not just generosity, but recognition that healthy family relationships involve supporting each other's independence rather than creating dependence. Amber, you've shown our entire family what real strength looks like, Grandmother Rose said as she placed my hand in David's at the garden altar, decorated with flowers we had planted together during our engagement. You chose truth and freedom over comfort and manipulation, and that courage has inspired all of us to build better relationships. The wedding guests included extended family members who had also been victimized by my parents' manipulation, but were now working together to create honest family connections. Uncle Tom served as David's best man, having become a father figure who supported my independence rather than exploiting my loyalty. Cousin Jenny and Aunt Linda had become the sisters I never had, providing emotional support without financial demands. Melissa stood as my maid of honor, representing the friendship that had sustained me through the darkest period of discovering family betrayal while providing the courage to pursue legal justice. Her loyalty during months of legal proceedings and emotional recovery had demonstrated what genuine support looked like when it wasn't motivated by personal gain. You've taught me that real friendship means supporting someone's growth even when it's difficult or inconvenient, Melissa said during her wedding toast. Your courage in leaving an abusive situation has inspired everyone who knows you to examine their own relationships and demand better for themselves. Or Sarah attended with Emma and Tyler, having completed court-ordered counseling while rebuilding her relationship with her children through honest communication and legal financial support. The custody recovery process had required her to demonstrate genuine change rather than just promises, creating accountability that protected everyone involved. Aunt Amber Mom says we can visit your new house and help you plant flowers, Emma said during the reception, representing the possibility of building healthy relationships with my niece and nephew based on genuine affection rather than manipulation or obligation. Sarah's presence at the wedding reflected months of difficult conversations about forgiveness, accountability, and the slow process of rebuilding trust that had been destroyed through years of deception. The relationship remained cautious but hopeful based on her demonstrated commitment to honest communication and legal behavior. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I'm grateful for the chance to show you that I can be a different kind of sister, Sarah said during a private moment at the reception. The counseling has helped me understand how wrong we were to exploit your love and generosity for so many years. David's proposal at the courthouse after my final testimony had represented the possibility of love that strengthened rather than weakened both partners. His patient support through the legal proceedings demonstrated commitment based on genuine care rather than conditional approval dependent on my ability to provide financial or emotional resources. I promise to support your independence and growth rather than trying to control or manipulate you for my own benefit, David said during our wedding vows, specifically addressing the healthy relationship dynamics we were committed to maintaining. I promise that our marriage will be based on mutual respect and genuine partnership rather than obligation or dependence. The wedding ceremony concluded with a commitment to each other and to the extended family relationships we were building, based on honest communication, mutual support, and respect for individual autonomy. The celebration represented not just romantic love, but the broader community of people who had chosen to support our happiness rather than exploit our resources. As we danced under the stars in Grandmother Rose's garden, I reflected on the life lessons that had emerged from the most painful period of my life, recognizing that the betrayal and legal battle had ultimately led to freedom and authentic relationships I might never have experienced otherwise. The most important lesson was understanding the difference between family loyalty and enabling abuse. Real family love supports growth and independence rather than creating dependence and obligation. Healthy relationships make people stronger rather than weaker, and genuine care involves respecting boundaries rather than manipulating emotions for personal gain. You've learned to value yourself based on who you are rather than what you can provide for others, Dr. Chen had observed during one of our final counseling sessions. That's the foundation for building relationships based on mutual respect rather than exploitation. The financial recovery process had restored most of my losses while teaching me about appropriate boundaries between personal resources and family support. Helping people occasionally was generous. Funding ongoing irresponsibility while enabling destructive behavior was harmful to everyone involved. Money should strengthen relationships by reducing stress, not create relationships based on dependence and resentment, Jennifer had explained during our work together. Healthy families support each other's financial independence rather than creating systems that require ongoing sacrifice from one person for everyone else's benefit. The legal consequences had provided justice while demonstrating that toxic family relationships were not obligations that had to be endured indefinitely. Sometimes the greatest act of love was refusing to enable destructive behavior, even when that refusal resulted in temporary conflict or permanent relationship changes. You showed incredible strength in choosing legal action over continued victimization, Agent Rodriguez had said during our final interview. Your courage has protected not just yourself, but hundreds of other potential victims who will benefit from the criminal network being dismantled. The broader impact of our case had resulted in federal legislation that would protect other families while providing better resources for victims of family financial abuse. Congressional testimony had transformed personal trauma into meaningful change that extended far beyond our individual circumstances. Your story has become part of the legal precedent that will help other victims seek justice and protection, Judge Morrison had noted during the final restitution hearing. Sometimes individual courage creates changes that benefit entire communities. The recovery process had taught me that healing from family manipulation required building new relationships that demonstrated healthy dynamics while processing the grief of losing relationships that had never actually been based on genuine love or respect. You're not just recovering from financial abuse, Dr. Chen had explained. You're learning what healthy family relationships look like for the first time in your adult life. That's a complex process that takes time and patience with yourself. The new beginning represented in our wedding was not just about romantic love, but about the possibility of building family relationships based on mutual support, honest communication, and respect for individual autonomy. The extended family members present had earned their place through consistent demonstration of healthy relationship patterns. As David and I prepared to leave for our honeymoon in Ireland, a trip funded by our own legitimate savings, rather than money taken from exploited family members, I felt grateful for the painful journey that had ultimately led to freedom and authentic love. The life lesson that had emerged most clearly was that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable destructive behavior, even when that refusal is difficult and painful for everyone involved. Real love supports growth and independence rather than creating dependence and obligation. Thank you for choosing courage over comfort, Grandmother Rose said as we said goodbye after the reception. You've shown all of us what it means to value yourself enough to demand healthy relationships based on genuine love rather than manipulation and exploitation. The future held promise for building the life I had always wanted, but had been trained to believe was selfish to pursue. Financial independence, genuine love, and healthy family relationships were not unrealistic dreams, but achievable goals that required courage to establish appropriate boundaries while refusing to accept treatment that diminished rather than honored my worth as a person. The wedding dance ended with David and me surrounded by people who celebrated our happiness, rather than resenting our success, representing the family relationships I had always deserved, but finally had the strength to insist upon and protect. Have you ever been in a situation where family members took advantage of your kindness and generosity? How did you handle it? I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like this video to help it reach others who might be facing similar challenges. Don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories about overcoming family manipulation and building healthy relationships based on mutual respect. Share this video with anyone who might benefit from hearing about the importance of setting boundaries with family members who cross the line from support into exploitation. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and remember that you deserve relationships that make you stronger, not weaker. Until next time, take care of yourselves and never be afraid to demand the respect and love you deserve.